In today's video, I want to talk about something that I don't usually talk about on my 40k channel, and that's going to be talking some lore. I think you already know who I really want to talk about, and that's going to be the orcs. I love the orcs. I freaking love the orcs. I love them in-game and out of game. In-game, they're malicious, haughty unit who are sending hundreds of beast snaggers, boys, and knobs into the enemy's face to chop up and change their appearance a little bit. Or you're sending massive amounts of mech guns and crazy stupid weapons that basically shoot bubbles. But that's all fun and good to talk about, but when you get into the actual lore side of the orcs, it becomes even funner. From things like how they've become the orcs in the first place and all the events they've actually lived through, to even their characters and clans who have so many individual stories and different quirks and things to talk about. It's crazy. And once you get into all those little fine details about things like the war and even their stratagems and enhancements and why that is because it is, it's so much fun to research and actually talk about. So that's exactly what I want to go over in this video. I want to explain to you every single piece of orc lore. Well, not every single piece, because that'd be way too long, but a basic run over of how orcs are orcs today because of the events they've lived through, all the clans explained, and why they are who they are because of their belief system, and some future events that orcs might choose to live through, basically in the 40k universe as the lore progresses. So, I don't want to waste any more of your time, let's just jump straight into it with how exactly are orcs today. Now, how exactly have the orcs become the orcs we know today based off the events they've lived through? Well, you see, when the universe was basically being torn a new arsehole by the war in heaven, when the Necrons were fighting the old ones, and when the old ones were losing like crap to the Necrons, they realized they needed some super soldiers who were bred purely for fighting. Some mass unit they could send out and actually deal with the Catan and the Necrons so they wouldn't be a pain in the ass anymore. And that's where the orcs came in. But you see, they weren't orcs back then. They were called what we know as crorks, and crorks are like if orcs took steroids and wore custodian armor. They were basically just goated orcs. They were amazing at shooting, had vast amounts of weaponry and advanced technology, were actually quite smart and actually diplomatic at points, and were freakishly big and were tearing the Necrons apart in insane amounts of numbers, and were basically built to kill gods, and they were doing a very good job at it. But eventually, once the killing really died down and the Necrons and the Catan kind of backed off a little bit and there wasn't as much fighting going on, the Krorks didn't really have much of their purpose to be fulfilled, so they started shrinking and deforming, and their brains started getting smaller, and to the point where they undeveloped into the orcs we know today. Basically, a stupider, less intelligent, less strong, less advanced, and definitely less diplomatic version of the Krorks. And that's what they became. But the thing is, that didn't really get less of them. There was still a ton of orcs. Well, Krorks, but now orcs. And it became an insane pain to deal with, and the threat was still very much there. But it definitely did help wind down the Catan and the Necrons a lot, so that the war on heaven wouldn't just tear apart the universe as we know it. But that's pretty much Ork's backstory in a sense, so let's actually get into why and, how they kind of operate today. Now, how do Orks fare into the current 40k universe? And explaining their lore probably isn't as straightforward and understandably epic and cool tale as explaining Drukhari or Eldar or Space Marine or Tower lore, and it's pretty downright stupid and backwards to actually explain how orcs work, but that's why I bloody love them. You see, orcs work in the entire sense of believing really hard in specific things. I'll give you a perfect example of this. If you choose to paint certain colors on certain equipment, materials, vehicles, or anything, that effect will actually happen based off the colors you painted, because the orcs believe that the color affects the thing. So, for example, if you choose to paint a vehicle red, the orcs believe that red makes things go faster, and enough orcs believe that, so red actually makes the vehicle go faster. Or orcs also believe that if you paint things yellow, the explosion will be bigger. So if you choose to paint grenades yellow, the explosion will actually be bigger. Or if you choose to paint an orc purple, orcs believe that purple means more sneaky. So if you choose to paint an orc purple, the orc will be more sneaky. And that's basically how they work. And now, when I say placebo, I don't mean like they all chant Kumbaya and believe really hard in one thing. It was actually a gift given to them by the old ones, where if they believe hard enough in something, it will generally happen. So you look at their massive walkers, guns, weaponry, abilities, just imagine anything they have, it's run entirely off belief. So if things don't usually make sense, how these bits of metal have been smashed together and actually walking, it's because the orcs believe that it will actually happen. And this ability isn't as strong as it seems. It's not like they can believe the whole enemy will die and everything will die. It's more of a scaled down version of that, where if they kind of believe the things they build, the things they have, or the things they paint will happen, it will generally happen. So they can't just randomly go up to the Emperor and say, you die, and he will die if enough orcs believe in it. It's not that stupidly overpowered. But a lot of their things, like I said, just run solely off this, but it solely also runs off their War energy, which is a collective force inside the orcs that is channeled out through battle. And basically, it's so powerful that these things called weird boys basically have to harness it and collect energy through the orcs so their freaking heads don't explode from enough War energy that's been built up inside them. And the problem with the War energy is that when the orcs call a War, which is an intense kind of clan of war, enough War energy is channeled through them, which makes them freaking insane, and do a lot more damage in melee combat to the enemy, basically making them more angrier, more tough, and just generally outright harder to beat. And this is all super cool. And a lot of their characters also follow the same stupid, dumb, backwards lore that goes along with orcs. I'll give you a perfect example of Tusker. Now, Tusker was a great warlord who led a great warlord who led a great, or not warlord, but a great war boss who led a great general sense of orcs. Now, when he fought demons, they once fought demons, this war clan, and when they fought demons, they believed that they were so fun to beat, they actually wanted to take themselves down basically to hell to fight the demons. And usually if you go to hell, or the place where demons are found, you get corrupted, as the energy there is so corrupt that you actually turn into a demon chaos spawn yourself. But the orcs are so stupid and basically believe they're so freaking dumb that they just completely negated that and went straight and fought every demon in that collective city or the hive or wherever they were, and went ham. And they actually went up to the demon prince, who obviously Tusker did die, but he chopped off his nutsack off the demon prince, and so it was actually an epic battle. And I believe Khorne, or the demon prince, actually brings back Tusker every single day to continuously relive that fight because he's just so goddamn fun to fight. So as you can see, orcs are basically the equivalent to the most stupid, backwards, retarded, kind of doesn't make any sense, how does that happen kind of clan in the whole 40k universe. And this simply all goes off the idea is because they believe it can happen. Now that's basically orcs in a nutshell of how they operate in the current 40k universe, where all their mechs, guns, and things are channeled by War energy and the power of belief. So I'm going to explain to you every single orc clan now, and how each clan represents a different factor of orcs, and how they each play differently, their belief system, the weapons they choose to take, and how they even choose to talk to other factions. So let's jump straight into it with every single orc faction, or every single orc clan explained. Now I'm going to explain to you every single orc clan, or clans spelt with a Z, in the current 40k orc universe, and how each clan represents a different ideology in what they believe. And the very first clan we're going to go off with is going to be the Goths. Now the Goths are basically the orcs who are probably the most common descendant of the Orks. They're basically the angriest, the toughest, the most stupidest, well, not stupidest, but the most just generally angry orcs. They're the biggest orcs. They'll tear through you. They'll just rip off your arms and beat you to death with them. They're just angry orcs, and they represent actually in the game all the boys, all the knobs, and kind of all the angry units. So you're going to be looking at foot soldiers. They love their boys. They love sending in mass amounts of boys with angry amounts of ferocity into the enemy and just tearing them apart. A good example of this is even Ghazghkull Thrakla, the Primarch of the orcs, who is insane freaking durability, toughness, and anger, is a Goth. So Goths will naturally just push forward in any sense they can to tear apart the enemy in pure fits of rage, and are most likely to just have the least amount of mercy when you're versing an orc clan. They basically do not care, and they just want to fight, get in there, and do insane amounts of damage with lots and lots and lots of orcs, and an intense amount of brute force in return. And their kind of choice of colours is more of a checker-based pattern they use to set in it. And this is either because they freaking love racing, or they freaking love soccer, or because a specific Space Marine chapter they were versing, they idolized so much to the point where they actually kind of identified as that Space Marine chapter and imprinted the marks of the black and white checker pattern on themselves to represent strength and durability when in battle. But yeah, that's the Goths. Now let's move on to the next orc clan. The next clan I'm going to talk about is going to be the Evil Sons. Now, the Evil Sons are basically the speed freak versions of the Orks. They love going fast, they love kicking it up with insane amounts of vehicles, whether that be motorbikes, buggies, race cars, or even planes to an extent, in high dune lands where they can just tear it up and crash the vehicles into the enemy units. And they kind of, I think, invented the whole idea of the red goes faster ideology. So their whole kind of color choice is going to be red, so everything they paint will naturally go faster. And Ghazghkull Thrakla and usually other war bosses or war bands might even hire Evil Sons to an extent to build some vehicles for them so they can send their units insanely fast into the enemy, crash into it, or do insane amounts of kind of firepower with the stupid amount of vehicles they choose to have. Basically, these orcs are kind of like the engineering orcs who choose to kind of create the best vehicles that the orcs can possibly make and have the most idea of how to understand why vehicles work the way they do. And like I said, this is in a sense where warbands will actually hire them out to create their own vehicles. And a lot of them kind of represent that in the actual game, where you can see things like the custom booster blaster, or even the Dakka jets, and the warbikers, for example, who are all vehicles built by the Evil Sons to basically go faster in an intense amount of way, and just tear it up in any place possible, and go much, much faster than all of the other orcs. But yeah, that's going to be the Evil Sons. Now let's move on to the next orc clan. The next orc clan we're going to move on to is going to be the Bad Moons. Now before I explain the Bad Moons, I kind of have to explain orc currency a little bit, because it kind of plays into this whole orc clan in the first place. You see, orc currency basically works off the idea of teeth, and not teeth in your mouth, but teeth that have been knocked out of your mouth and are now in your pocket. And orc bad moons have the fastest growing teeth out of any single orc, so the amount of teeth they can make is a lot faster, meaning they're going to be a lot richer than other orcs, to the point where other war bosses and war bands will actually have groups of bad moons in their clan, basically just to knock out their teeth from time to time to be able to afford more things. But the actual Bad Moons clan itself is the richest clan in the orc tribe, or the orc universe in itself, and can afford so many more things like heavy amounts of armor, whether that be represented with the Meganobs or the Gorkanaut or the Morkanaut, or things like heavy amounts of shooting like the mech guns, and will most likely actually are probably the most shootiest orcs in the 40k universe, where they would rather choose heavy amounts of unstable firepower instead of running up there like the Goths choose to do in close melee combat. Will this be through things like the mech's custom blasters, or like I said, the absolute insane amount of shooting that the Morkanaut actually has. So basically Bad Moons are just the richest orcs in the orc universe, and would rather choose to shoot than to get in close range combat, because of the amount of money they can choose to afford actually decently okay guns. But yeah, that is going to be Bad Moons in a nutshell. So let's move on to the next orc clan. The next orc clan we're going to be talking about is going to be the Death Skulls. Now, unlike the Bad Moons, who kind of represent shooting, and the Goths, who represent melee combat with brute force, the Death Skulls kind of take a different approach to battle. Instead of waiting out for battles to be completed, and then going in and looting the absolute heck out of any kind of things that are left, whether this be through pulling out orcs' teeth, or stripping apart different mechs so they can rebuild them in their own sense of ways. And this is represented through the idea that these orcs are kind of more mechanized. So you'll be taking things like the Killer Cans, or the Death Dreads, or the Looters, who literally whole purpose is to be looted. And most orcs in this clan will usually have cybernetic augmentations from the kind of mechs they've looted in the past. And this is actually very helpful in terms of, it's not kind of being weak, it's more being smart and not running in head first when you know you're going to die. And these guys would rather stay back and kind of loot different vehicles in a sense of just building new things. And this is probably where the ideology of kind of looting comes in for the orcs, and Death Skulls probably implement that the most out of any orc clan. But yeah, that's the Death Skulls. Basically, the looting versions of orcs who like to stay back, wait for that, and then build their own cybernetic versions and augmentations of anything they can, really. So let's move on to the next orc clan. Now we're going to move on to the complete opposite spectrum of the Death Skulls in terms of cybernetics, and we're going to move on to the Snake Bites, who love the idea of the primitive ways and would rather revert back to the old ways of orcs instead of kind of following the new age of high amounts of wacky guns and insane amounts of melee combat with like robots and chainsaws, and would rather follow the idea, instead of riding bikes they ride squigs, instead of taking choppers they take spears, instead of taking guns they take more choppers. And their actual name, Snakebite, represents a very good factor and actually makes a lot of sense, like other names of clans. And as a coming of age practice of Snakebite is actually to be bitten by a highly venomous snake, and to basically be suck the venom out themselves. So the venomous kind of induce of that makes them very resistant to different forms of poisons, venoms, or attacks that may have hurt their immune system, making them very tough orcs and very durable orcs. So, if anything, they're kind of like the very tankiest orcs. So, Goths are the most killiest, and kind of snakebites are the most toughest, in a sense, in terms of poison. Now, the good thing about snakebites is that returning to your primitive ways also allows them to access a large amount of squigs, and being some of the best squig breeders, which is the orcs animals, and basically the orc universe, and being the only tribe who can breed the squig Goth, basically a massive squig who can turn the tide of any battle, and is one of the greatest helps in the sense of the snake bites in the battle, and gives them the biggest tide. So the squig hogs, the squigosaurs, any squig that is bred is basically bred in the idea of the snake bites, and actually the runts and the gretchens that are bred in snake bites are also better and more powerful. So these are usually sold to other clans to make them even more powerful or even more durable, in the sense of the best squigs win the best prizes. So that is the snake bites, basically the biggest squig breeders and the most primitive tribe in the orc clan. So let's move on to the final and last orc clan. The last orc clan is probably one of the most controversial and confusing orc clans, which is the Blood Axes. Now, the Blood Axes are probably the most intelligent and most kind of diplomatically understanding orcs that there are on the orc clan, and actually make trading alliances and actually work with the Imperium in certain senses. And this makes them hated by other orcs, and were actually hunted, the entire clan was hunted by most of the orcs in terms of getting rid of them, because they were kind of turning on the orc ways and not following Gork and Mork in a great sense. And they were almost eradicated to complete destruction, but enough blood axes were able to escape, where they make the most smallest orc tribe, but the orcs that kind of choose to be around are very, very sneaky, and would rather still work with the Imperium, making trading alliances, and kind of pop up from here to there in different kind of orc lore, or different kind of orc codexes. Great example of this is going to be the Commandos or Snickrot, who are very famous blood axes in terms of what they've done for the trading kind of Imperial Alliance. But that's the Blood Axe. It's basically the sneakiest orcs, but also the intelligent orcs who choose to make alliances with other kind of armies in terms of basically just being away, but being so hated by other orcs that they were basically hunted to extinction. So that is the last orc tribe. We have one more little one I want to explain to you, in a sense of not really a tribe, but more of a kind of an alliance that orcs choose to form. Now we're going to move on to less clans of orcs, but more like little side groups that have been formed that kind of represent different aspects of orcs and how they play when different kind of ideologies or different perspectives are placed upon them. The first one's going to be the Freebootas, and the Freebootas are basically orcs who have chosen to kind of discard the clan they want to go in and have joined a very large collective of orcs, basically where things from different tribes, whether it be Bad Moons, Snakebites, Death Skulls, Evil Sons, or any orc clan, choose to come together, combining all their strengths of the squig breeding, or the riches, or the mechanical aspect, or the speed, or the ferocity, and bring it all together into one collective group, and where the war bosses in this group will choose to wear captain hats, or basically just pirate hats, to represent the idea of not really following one specific orc clan, but being their own separate freebooting clan. The only problem with this is that most orcs actually turn on each other, because the beliefs are so different from where they once come from, and so it may seem like a very powerful aspect, combining all the strength of all the orcs together, and creating one kind of super clan, but super clans don't usually grow past a couple numbers because of the amount of ferocity and the orcs, like controversy and racism they show between each other in terms of coming together with different beliefs and centricated ideas. But that's the freebooters. Now, what happens when the orcs choose to land on other planets with no orcs to go off? Now, orcs do have an idea of how to work, but they kind of need some kind of inspiration, as from the clans, whether that be through shooting with bad moons or breeding with snakebites. But when orcs choose to land on, or actually orcs land on different planets, from the rocket ships or the asteroids they land on, they become feral orcs, and feral orcs are kind of orcs who have no idea what to do, so they just do their own thing, and basically collect sticks, stones, and basic materials, wear cloth, and just go insane, and be an annoyance to whatever planet they choose to land on. And these orcs aren't necessarily like a planetary threat in sense of like the orcs that we know today, and they're more orcs who just have no idea how anything works, so they throw whatever they can, and whatever they find, at the enemy. And these are less of, like I said, planetary threats, and more just pains in the ass for whatever planet they choose to land on. And that is going to be all of the orc lore and how they've come into fruition to the orcs we know today, and how the different orc clans represent different things in terms of what they believe. I'm sorry that maybe I kind of skimmed over a couple things. I wanted to make this video nice and short so you get the quick grasp and understanding of how orcs work. If you want me to make a bit more of an in-depth version about a specific clan or a specific backstory for orcs, or even a specific character like how I explained Tusker, then feel free to leave a comment and explain to me why you want that and how you'd like to see me implement that into a lore video, because I love making lore videos and I would love to make more of them in the future about different armies, or even just more in-depth characters and stories and kind of different ways of play in the actual orc lore. But like I said, that's going to be all me from today, and I hope to catch you in the next one.